Rainwater dripped steadily through the cracked concrete above as Bolan pulled his thin blanket tighter beneath the bridge. The distant hum of traffic never stopped, blending with the cold wind that swept through the shadows where he now called home. Just months earlier, he had carried apartment keys, wore pressed clothes, and believed tomorrow would always be better. Then the layoffs came, the unpaid bills followed, and every promise collapsed faster than he could recover. Friends disappeared, opportunities vanished, and hope slowly became the heaviest thing he carried. Mourning offered little comfort. Bolan joined the quiet line outside a homeless shelter, surrounded by strangers whose tired eyes reflected stories much like his own. As volunteers handed out meals, a sharply dressed courier walked directly toward him, asking his name twice before placing a thick envelope into his trembling hands. Inside were legal documents bearing an unfamiliar law firm's seal. A distant relative he barely remembered had passed away, leaving him the family's abandoned ancestral land. Several pages described the neglected property as isolated, overgrown, and practically worthless. A few people nearby laughed when Bolan quietly mentioned the inheritance, joking that even abandoned dirt was still more valuable than his luck. Yet one sentence refused to leave his mind. The property contains an area that should never be disturbed, according to the final wishes of the family. No explanation followed. No reason was given. Confused, Bolan turned to the final page, where a faded photograph had been carefully attached decades earlier. It showed an enormous circular stone well standing alone in the middle of the ancestral land. Unlike every other part of the forgotten estate, the well had been sealed beneath massive iron plates, secured by thick, rusted chains, as though generations had feared whatever waited beneath. 2 days later, Bolan stepped off the aging bus with a worn backpack resting on his shoulder and the inheritance papers folded carefully inside his jacket. The countryside stretched endlessly before him, silent except for birds circling above forgotten fields. Following a narrow dirt road, he finally reached the property that had unexpectedly become his. The house looked as though time itself had abandoned it. Windows hung shattered from warped frames, the roof sagged beneath decades of neglect, and thick vines swallowed entire walls. Wild grass reached his knees, while twisted trees surrounded the estate, like silent guardians protecting memories no one wanted to remember. Every step stirred the scent of damp earth and rotting wood, reminding him that generations had long since walked away from this place. Believing there was nothing worth saving, Bolan wandered into the nearby village to ask about selling the land. A few locals exchanged amused glances before laughing openly. One man shrugged, insisting nobody would waste money on a crumbling farmhouse and worthless acres that produced nothing. Another joked that Bolan had inherited little more than expensive problems. Their laughter faded the instant he mentioned the old stone well shown in the photograph. The conversation stopped so suddenly that even the breeze seemed to disappear. One woman quietly lowered her eyes and walked away without another word. 2 older men exchanged nervous looks before leaving the small gathering altogether. Another neighbor pretended not to hear the question, locking his shop door despite the afternoon sun still hanging high above the village. Only one elderly man remained. His weathered face turned pale as he stared towards the distant hills where the estate stood hidden beyond the trees. Leaning closer, he spoke so softly that Bolan almost missed the words. Some secrets are buried because they're too valuable to survive the truth. Before Bolan could ask another question, the old man slowly turned away, leaving him alone with growing unease and far more questions than answers. The old man's warning echoed through Bolan's thoughts as he returned to the deserted estate before sunset. Determined to uncover the truth for himself, he pushed through walls of tangled vines and thorn-covered bushes that had consumed nearly every path. The deeper he ventured, the more forgotten the property seemed, as though nature had spent decades erasing every trace of the family who once lived there. Then he saw it. Hidden beneath curtains of ivy stood the enormous stone well from the faded photograph. Its weathered stones were dark with age, yet something immediately felt wrong. While the farmhouse crumbled and every fence had collapsed into the earth, the ground surrounding the well looked unexpectedly clean. Thick vines had been cut back recently, exposing the circular stone walls as if someone wanted the structure to remain accessible. Bolan slowly walked closer, his heartbeat quickening with every step. Fresh footprints pressed clearly into the damp soil, leading toward the well before disappearing again. Kneeling beside them, he realized they couldn't have been more than a day or two old. His eyes climbed to the heavy iron plates sealing the opening. Although rust covered most of the metal, two sturdy padlocks looked almost brand new, their polished surfaces reflecting the fading evening light. Someone had replaced them recently. The realization sent a chill through him. If the property had truly been abandoned for decades, who kept returning to protect a sealed well? Unable to shake the growing unease, Bolan locked himself inside the old farmhouse as darkness settled across the valley. Sleep never came. Every creak of aging timber sounded louder in the silence. Shortly after midnight, a faint glow drifted across the overgrown fields outside his broken window. Bolan cautiously peered through a crack in the wooden boards. Several flashlights moved silently between the trees, stopping only when they reached the sealed well. He wasn't alone on the property. Someone else was searching for whatever lay hidden beneath the iron plates. The mysterious visitors vanished before sunrise, leaving no voices, no vehicles, and no trace beyond the footprints surrounding the well. Bolan waited until daylight before stepping outside, but the field stood empty once again. Whatever those strangers had been searching for, they had known exactly where to look. Determined to find answers before they returned, he began searching every corner of the decaying farmhouse. Hours passed as he opened broken cabinets, lifted loose floorboards, and emptied dust-covered trunks that had remained untouched for decades. Behind a warped bookshelf, his hand struck a hidden wooden compartment. Inside lay several leather-bound journals wrapped carefully in faded cloth, alongside yellowed maps, coded sketches, brittle family letters, and pages filled with unfamiliar symbols. The handwriting belonged to different generations, yet every journal spoke about the same place, the well. To Bolan's surprise, none of the entries described drawing water from it. Instead, they referred to it as the gate and the keeper of the family's greatest trust. One carefully folded map showed tunnels beneath the estate, while another page contained detailed measurements that made the structure seem far deeper than any ordinary well should have been. One sentence appeared repeatedly throughout the journals, written in different handwriting but always with identical words. When greed arrives, open only with truth. Bolan read the warning again and again, unable to understand what truth his ancestors expected someone to prove. Before he could study the remaining pages, the sound of tires crunching across gravel interrupted the silence. A polished black SUV rolled into the overgrown driveway. Moments later, a sharply dressed businessman stepped out, smiling with surprising confidence. Without asking a single question about the property, he offered to buy the entire estate immediately for a price far beyond its apparent value. As the man waited for an answer, another expensive vehicle appeared behind him. Someone else had come to make an even bigger offer, writing. By the following afternoon, Bolan realized the first offer had not been an isolated coincidence. One expensive vehicle after another rolled through the rusted gate, carrying developers, antique collectors, corporate lawyers, and wealthy investors who spoke with remarkable confidence. None of them admired the crumbling farmhouse or the neglected fields. Their eyes always drifted toward the distant trees where the sealed well stood hidden from view. The offers climbed with astonishing speed. What began as a few $1,000s became tens of thousands before lunchtime. By evening, one businessman calmly slid a contract across the dusty kitchen table, promising hundreds of thousands for the property if Bolan signed before sunset. Another insisted the offer would disappear forever by morning, while a third quietly hinted that someone else would purchase the land whether Bolan agreed or not. Their urgency made no sense. If the estate was truly worthless, why were powerful strangers fighting so desperately to own it? The answer could only mean one thing. Something beneath the land was worth far more than anyone wanted him to discover. Bolan refused every offer. The next morning, the consequences began. He found his aging car with every window shattered and deep scratches carved across its doors. No valuables had been stolen. The damage was a warning, not a robbery. Rushing inside the farmhouse, he felt another wave of panic. The hidden compartment behind the bookshelf had been forced open. The leather-bound journals, coded maps, and family letters had vanished without a trace, while everything else remained untouched. That night, as rain battered the roof, a loud crash echoed through the empty house. Someone was trying to force the front door open. Bolan quietly extinguished his lantern and stood frozen in the darkness, listening as heavy footsteps circled the farmhouse. Whatever secret his ancestors had protected for generations was no longer just a mystery. It had become something people were willing to threaten, steal, and perhaps even kill for. The attempted break-in erased every doubt from Bolan's mind. Whoever had stolen the journals believed the secret beneath the well was close to being uncovered. Waiting any longer would only give them another chance to erase the truth forever. Remembering the elderly neighbor's quiet warning, Bolan sought out the few villagers who still valued honesty more than fear. Though reluctant, 3 trusted locals agreed to help after hearing about the stolen journals and the growing threats surrounding the estate. Just after sunrise, they gathered around the ancient well. Rust groaned as crowbars strained against the heavy iron plates. Chains that had remained untouched for generations rattled loudly across the weathered stone. Each movement seemed to awaken the silence surrounding the property, as though the land itself remembered why the well had been sealed. With one final effort, the last plate shifted aside. No water reflected the morning light. Instead, a narrow spiral staircase disappeared into darkness, carved directly into solid stone. A cold breath of air rose from below, carrying the scent of damp earth, ancient dust, and centuries of forgotten history. Bolan lit an old lantern and carefully descended the worn steps. Every footfall echoed endlessly through the underground passage, while intricate carvings covered the circular walls. Strange symbols, family crests, and unfamiliar inscriptions stretched deeper than the lantern's glow could reach, suggesting the passage had been built with extraordinary purpose rather than simple craftsmanship. At the bottom, the staircase ended before an enormous stone door sealed tightly within the rock. Unlike the iron plates above, this entrance bore no lock, only a weathered inscription matching the words repeated throughout the missing journals. When greed arrives, open only with truth. Bolan reached toward the carved surface, determined to understand its meaning. Before his fingers touched the stone, muffled voices drifted down from the open well above. More than one person had arrived. They were no longer alone beneath the earth. The voices grew louder until several strangers appeared at the mouth of the well, their flashlights cutting through the darkness like searching blades. Among them stood the businessmen who had tried to buy the estate, accompanied by lawyers and stern-faced security guards. Gone were the polite smiles and generous offers. One man shouted that Bolan had no legal right to enter the underground passage and demanded he leave the property immediately. Bolan refused. Within hours, local authorities arrived after receiving competing ownership complaints. The strangers produced aging documents claiming the land had been transferred decades earlier through a forgotten agreement. At first glance, the paperwork appeared convincing, but a county records officer noticed irregular signatures and missing registration seals. As older archives were examined, investigators uncovered evidence that multiple deeds had been forged years before, quietly creating false ownership claims over the ancestral estate. What had begun as a mystery was rapidly becoming a legal battle. While officials secured the surface and lawyers argued over documents, Bolan realized time was slipping away. If the chamber below contained proof of his family's true inheritance, it could disappear before the courts ever reached a decision. Guided by memory and the fragments he had read in the stolen journals, he quietly returned to the underground passage through the still open well. The deeper he ventured beyond the stone door, the narrower the tunnel became. Dust swirled through the stale air as ancient corridors stretched into darkness, untouched by sunlight for generations. Every distant echo made him wonder whether someone was following only a few steps behind. He could almost feel history waiting ahead, hidden behind one final barrier. If he reached the chamber first, the truth might finally survive. If his enemies reached it before him, generations of carefully protected secrets could vanish forever, taking his family's legacy with them. Bolan pressed his hands against the weathered stone door, searching every carved symbol for the meaning his ancestors had tried so desperately to preserve. His eyes settled on the familiar inscription repeated throughout the missing journals. Instead of forcing the entrance, he spoke the words aloud with quiet conviction. When greed arrives, open only with truth. A deep rumble echoed through the chamber. Dust drifted from the ceiling as hidden mechanisms, silent for generations, slowly awakened. The massive stone door shuddered before sliding inward, revealing a chamber untouched by time. Bolan stood frozen, his lantern casting trembling light across shelves, chests, and carefully stacked wooden crates that looked exactly as they had been left decades earlier. It was not a forgotten tomb. It was a perfectly preserved vault. He stepped inside, overwhelmed by the sight before him. Leather-bound family records filled one wall, protected inside sealed cabinets. Nearby rested polished wooden cases containing rare gold coins, historic medals, antique jewelry, and priceless artifacts wrapped in faded cloth. Every item had been meticulously catalogued, as though his ancestors had expected one final heir to uncover them. At the center of the chamber stood an iron table holding a collection of official documents secured beneath thick glass. Bolan carefully lifted the first file and felt his heartbeat quicken. They were original land grants, government records, and legally registered deeds proving that his family had safeguarded enormous wealth during a time of violent conflict, choosing secrecy over survival to prevent it from falling into corrupt hands. Another leather portfolio revealed something even more astonishing. Detailed geological surveys confirmed that the surrounding hills contained vast mineral-rich deposits, never claimed by outsiders because the true ownership had remained hidden beneath the sealed well. The land everyone had mocked as worthless was, in reality, one of the most valuable properties in the entire region. At last, every warning, every forged document, every desperate offer, and every threat made perfect sense. The well had never been built to hide water. It had been built to protect an entire fortune until the rightful heir finally returned. Within days, historians, geologists, legal specialists, and government archivists descended upon the ancestral estate. Every document recovered from the underground vault underwent meticulous examination, while each artifact was carefully authenticated. One by one, the experts reached the same remarkable conclusion. Nothing had been fabricated. Every record was genuine, every coin authentic, and every signature legally recognized despite the passing generations. The announcement spread with astonishing speed. Television crews arrived before sunrise. Newspapers published photographs of the sealed well on their front pages. Reporters described the discovery as one of the most extraordinary inheritances in recent memory. Independent surveys confirmed that the surrounding land contained valuable mineral deposits, while the historical collection alone was valued at an extraordinary sum. Combined with the legally protected land rights and priceless family treasures, the forgotten estate was suddenly worth a fortune beyond anything Bolan had ever imagined. Only weeks earlier, he had stood in a shelter line wondering where his next meal would come from. Now, financial advisors waited outside his gate. Business executives requested private meetings. The same investors who had laughed at his hesitation returned with even larger offers, hoping money could erase the threats and deception that had brought them there in the first place. Even distant relatives, silent for years, suddenly reached out with warm smiles and forgotten family stories. Bolan welcomed none of them. Instead, he wandered back to the ancient well as evening settled across the restored fields. The cool breeze carried the scent of fresh grass, replacing the loneliness that had once surrounded the estate. Looking into the darkness below, he realized the greatest inheritance was never measured by gold or land alone. His ancestors had trusted him with their name, their sacrifice, and the truth they had protected through generations of hardship. Standing where his journey had truly begun, Bolan faced one final question. Would unimaginable wealth transform him into the very kind of person his family had spent generations trying to protect their legacy from? The discovery beneath the ancestral estate triggered an investigation far greater than anyone had expected. Forensic document experts examined the forged deeds that had surfaced during the ownership dispute, comparing them with the original records recovered from the underground vault. Piece by piece, decades of deception unraveled. Officials uncovered a carefully organized scheme that had passed through multiple hands, allowing influential individuals to manipulate land records and conceal the family's rightful ownership for generations. Court hearings followed, drawing national attention. The businessmen who had pressured Bolan, along with the lawyers and officials who knowingly supported the fraudulent claims, faced criminal charges and substantial financial penalties. Every forged document was declared invalid, and the courts formally restored the ancestral estate, its hidden vault, and the surrounding mineral-rich land to Bolan as the sole lawful heir. The verdict brought more than a legal victory. It restored the truth. Historians began publishing the remarkable story of Bolan's ancestors, revealing how they had hidden the family's wealth during a time of violent conflict, rather than allow it to be seized by corruption and greed. The sealed well was never a place of superstition or fear. It had been a carefully designed sanctuary, preserving both a priceless inheritance and the evidence needed to protect future generations. Soon, visitors traveled from distant cities to see the restored estate and learn the extraordinary history buried beneath its quiet fields. The family that had once been dismissed as forgotten became a symbol of courage, sacrifice, and unwavering integrity. Standing before the ancient well, now recognized as a historic landmark, Bolan quietly placed fresh flowers beside the weathered stone. For the first time in generations, his ancestors were remembered not for what they had hidden, but for why they had chosen to protect it. At last, the truth had prevailed, and justice was finally complete. Bolan never considered selling the estate, despite receiving offers worth more money than he had ever imagined. Instead, he chose to honor the people whose courage had carried his family through generations of hardship. The crumbling farmhouse was carefully restored, preserving its original character while filling its silent rooms with life once again. Beneath it, the hidden chamber remained untouched except for careful conservation, becoming a protected historical site where every document and artifact told the remarkable story of sacrifice, patience, and unwavering hope. His own years of homelessness were never forgotten. Remembering the loneliness of sleeping beneath a bridge and wondering whether anyone cared, Bolan established community programs that offered temporary housing, job training, and educational opportunities for struggling families. He believed the greatest value of his inheritance was not measured by treasure, but by the chance to change someone else's future. Slowly, the surrounding village flourished. Abandoned buildings found new purpose, local businesses reopened, and children who once dreamed of leaving discovered reasons to stay. The estate that had once symbolized ruin became a place of resilience, gratitude, and new beginnings. Visitors traveled from across the country to walk its peaceful grounds and learn the incredible history hidden beneath the ancient well. They admired the restored home, studied the preserved vault, and listened in silence as guides shared the story of the family that had protected truth instead of surrendering to greed. Few realized how close the entire legacy had come to vanishing forever beneath forged documents and forgotten memories. As evening settled over the countryside, Bolan paused beside the ancient well one final time. Freshly restored into the weathered stone was the same inscription that had guided him through darkness. "When greed arrives, open only with truth." He smiled quietly before walking toward the house, leaving the well behind. The camera slowly pulled away, revealing distant hills stretching beyond the estate, where untouched valleys disappeared into the horizon, whispering that even after his family's greatest inheritance had been uncovered, the land might still be guarding secrets no one had yet imagined.